In this milestone, we move into one of the most crucial steps in building a functional Red Hat pacemaker cluster. Performing authentication between all cluster nodes using the PCS tool. This authentication step is what allows the nodes to trust each other, exchange cluster configuration data, and establish the secure communication channel required for building and managing the cluster. Without this step, the nodes remain independent machines, unable to form a cluster, unable to join one, and unable to share any configuration. So this milestone plays a very foundational role in our setup. Before starting authentication. Now, before we begin running any PCS commands, it's important to make sure a few things are in place. The PCSD service must already be running on all nodes. The HackCluster password must be correctly set on node A. And all three nodes must be reachable over the network and resolvable via their hostnames. Because in this step, PCS will use the hostname mapping we configured in the previous milestone to reach the other nodes and perform authentication. But first we are going to generate an SSH key from node A and copy the generated SSH key to node B and node C. This will help the cluster nodes to communicate with the generated SSH key so that if node A wants to copy or access anything like files or other things to node B and node C, there will not be any obstacle for the nodes' communication. Switching to node A, primary admin node. Just like in most cluster tasks, we perform authentication from a single primary node. And that will be node A. Node A acts as the controller during the initial configuration process. So I switch to the terminal for node A and clear the screen to keep the output clean. The command we are about to run will ask node A to connect to node B and node C, using the HackCluster user and authenticate with them. Running the authentication. Now I run the authentication command. Here, I list all three nodes, node A, node B, and node C, because PCS needs to establish a trusted relationship among all of them simultaneously. Even though we run this command from node A, authentication will happen for every node listed. Once I run the command, the system prompts me for the HackCluster user's password. This is the password we created in the previous milestone. I carefully type it in, and if the password is correct, PCS will immediately begin establishing secure connections with the other nodes. Observing authentication output. After submitting the password, we should start seeing success messages for each node. Each line confirms that PCS was able to reach the node, log in with the HackCluster credentials, and exchange authentication keys. When all three nodes show a success status, we know that authentication has been completed properly. This is an extremely important checkpoint. If even one node fails authentication, we must resolve that before moving forward. Verifying authentication status. Now that authentication is complete, we verify the PCSD status across all nodes using the PCS tool. This command checks if PCSD is running and whether the authentication state is synchronized. Each node should return a clean and active response. If any node shows a missing key or a communication issue, it usually means the password was typed incorrectly or the host's file is inconsistent. Explaining why authentication. It's worth taking a moment to understand why this authentication step is so important. Pacemaker clusters depend heavily on trust. Every cluster node must be able to verify that configuration actions, such as adding resources, setting constraints, modifying quorum, or even issuing a fence operation, are coming from a legitimate administrator or a trusted peer node. If authentication is missing or broken, cluster commands will fail silently. The nodes may behave independently, and we will see errors during cluster creation or startup. So this simple step of authenticating the nodes is actually the backbone of all cluster operation. Troubleshooting hints. If authentication fails during this step, there are usually 3 very common reasons. The hackluster password does not match across nodes. The /etc/hosts file has a typo or missing entry. The PCSD service is not running on one of the nodes. These issues are easy to fix, but identifying them early is important, because they can cause bigger problems later when we attempt to create or start the cluster. Quick confirmation of cluster visibility. Now I run the PCS status command. At this stage, it will not show a cluster, because we have not created one yet. But it helps confirm that PCS is responding normally and ready for cluster creation in the next milestone. Final recap of this milestone. So to summarize this milestone, we performed authentication across all cluster nodes, verified PCSD communication, and ensured that each node trusts the others, using the hackluster user credentials.